Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, peace, according to Donald Trump, has a board, a chairman for life, and $1 billion entry fee. This week in Davos, the U.S. president unveiled his Board of Peace, a new global initiative to rebuild Gaza and potentially to do much more in the future. Some countries signed immediately, others quietly backed away. And most of Europe looked at the American-led peace project and said, absolutely not. But the world does not revolve around Central and Western Europe, at least not on this show. So on this episode, we look at who joined and who didn't, at least yet, from the Eastern perspective. Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
President Donald Trump on Thursday launched the Board of Peace following a signing ceremony at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Trump invited several Western countries to join the initiative, with many appearing hesitant or outright refusing the offer. Yet the proposal has gained traction with several countries in Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. Both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan announced on Monday that they will join the Board of Peace. Rival states, Armenia and Azerbaijan, also accepted the Trump administration's proposal to join the board. Russia has taken a more nuanced approach on the initiative, signaling support for the idea but not firmly committing to join. Speaking on Wednesday in Moscow, Vladimir Putin proposed that $1 billion worth of frozen Russian assets be contributed to the board.
Even before we decide on the issue of participation in the composition and work of the Board of Peace, taking into account Russia's special relationship with the Palestinian people, we could, I think, send $1 billion from Russian assets frozen under the previous U.S. administration to the Board of Peace.
Belarus will also join, with autocratic leader Alexander Lukashenko accepting the offer this week from President Trump. After years of hostile relations, both Russia and Belarus may view the board as a mechanism by which to thaw relations with Washington. Additionally, with many Western states signaling their unwillingness to cooperate with the United States in this venture, the Board of Peace could be seen as an opportunity for states in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus to grab some political spotlight for themselves.
And now, let's zone in on the East-planning portion of our show. Donald Trump continues to push for his Board of Peace to grow beyond a novel idea to a functional organization of nations. But what exactly is this Board of Peace, and how does it work? Well, here's a closer look.
We call it the Board of Peace, sort of a beautiful name.
Donald Trump first proposed the creation of the Board of Peace in September 2025, originally labeling it as an international forum to bring peace, reconstruction, and economic recovery to the Gaza Strip. However, Washington later changed course, saying that the board's mandate would be expanded to tackle other international conflicts.
It would be headed by a gentleman known as President Donald J. Trump.
The United Nations Security Council initially supported the plan last November, with the idea that the board would supervise the demilitarization and rebuilding of Gaza. However, some UN officials have raised concerns over comments from President Trump that the board could replace the United Nations. Member states of the board will serve 3-year terms, after which they will be required to pay $1 billion for a permanent seat. According to a U.S. official, funds raised by board members will be used towards rebuilding the Gaza Strip. President Trump will also serve as the inaugural chairman of the board, overseeing this novel international peace forum.
We just created the Board of Peace, which I think is going to be amazing.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Donald Trump has launched a Board of Peace, unveiled not at the United Nations, not in Washington, but in Davos, during a signing ceremony, with the stated purpose being to rebuild Gaza. Around 60 countries received invitations from the POTUS. Around 24 head of state have said yes so far. To sit permanently on the board, members must pay at least $1 billion. Trump is expected to chair the board for life unless he changes his mind. Other members rotate every 3 years. This is being presented as a bold new mechanism for peace, but structurally it does look more like a subscription service where the highest paying users get lifetime admin privileges. The list of early joiners could have been predicted. Israel is in, and so are Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, regional heavyweights with immediate interest in Gaza's future. Alongside them are a second tier of states: Hungary, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Morocco, Vietnam, Albania, Armenia, Belarus, countries that either value access to Washington or are comfortable with transactional diplomacy or have long experience navigating systems where loyalty matters more than process. And then there is the silent ones. Europe, broadly speaking, is not rushing to sign up. France has explicitly declined, citing incompatibility with UN resolutions and the UN Charter itself. Canada, after Mark Carney's speech at Davos, is obviously absent. Ottawa's invitation even got revoked after. Most of NATO's traditional core states are not there, so this, to me, is the central story. Because the Board of Peace is designed to bypass, not to complement the existing international system. The UN is slow and consensus-driven. Trump's board is fast, pay-to-play, and leader-centric. The other treats it as a deal, negotiable, conditional, and priced. Now, that logic explains both the appeal and the resistance. For countries like Hungary or Azerbaijan, it's proximity to power without lectures about norms. For Russia, which is considering participation, the board offers something even more valuable: a way back into elite diplomacy while openly reframing frozen assets as a voluntary contribution rather than a sanction. Europe, meanwhile, hears alarm bells. Not because the board lacks good intentions, but because it erodes the idea that international order is rules-based rather than personality-based. If peace can't be chaired for life, bought for $1 billion, and redefined by whoever controls the process, then the post-1945 system becomes optional. The question is whether this signals a longer-term shift, away from institutions and towards clubs. If that is the direction of travel, then the Board of Peace could be a stress test for the international order. Because once peace becomes a membership program, we're in deep trouble. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Richard Giragosian, founding director of the Regional Study Center. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you.
So today we're trying to figure out this whole Board of Peace because, of course, this is kind of dropped as a bomb, and we're still trying to kind of understand what it entails and will it or will it not replace a UN or be a supplement to it. Can you help us give a broader look at what to expect here?
Well, I'm not sure I have the clear answers, but I will offer some analysis. In terms of the U.S. president's latest initiative, this Board of Peace, it is very much a welcome development, despite the rather vague nature. However, of this initiative, there's an interesting paradox. This is a unilateral American move by President Trump, but through a multilateral approach. And it's designed in large part to consolidate American interests in spheres of influence around the world. However, I am seriously skeptical whether this is the best avenue to replace or challenge the United Nations Security Council. The real test is to come, especially regarding potential members and those who have been disinvited, for example, like Canada.
Right, like you mentioned, the member actually tells a lot as well, with people being disinvited, which does seem like it's basically just Trump's preferential list. Do you think that that's something that could be probably better reworked to be a little bit more productive than whether or not recently Trump got in a spat with someone?
Well, you're quite right. Everything President Trump is personal rather than even political. And at the same time, this is a reflection of Washington's approach to global issues as real estate transactions. Nevertheless, we do see a rather dangerous precedent inviting Russian President Putin, for example. But nevertheless, I don't think this is as serious as it would normally be in terms of an American initiative. and it is a welcome distraction from the previous American rhetoric over Greenland.
All right, you mentioned Putin being invited as well, but one of the argument that was brought up is, well, Russia seems to also be on the UN Security Council. With looking at the UN itself, we also have Iran on the Human Rights Board in Somalia chairing the Security Council. It does raise a lot of questions. Do you think that that's also, this Board of Peace is a result of the Washington finding UN to be obsolete?
Well, I do think frustration with the UN mechanism has been accumulating for many years, and it's not limited to Trump, and it's not limited to the Americans. Nevertheless, what this represents is an accumulation of President Trump's various initiatives at conflict resolution or conflict management around the world, everywhere from Armenia and Azerbaijan to other parts of the world. Nevertheless, what we do see is much less a challenge to the UN and much more a latest, rather destructive distraction coming from the Trump administration.
All right, and when we're looking at the list of countries that already signed on, be it Hungary, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Morocco, Vietnam, some of these countries, of course, does seem, again, like a Trump's preferential list, but also a lot of it is on the more kind of eastern side of things. Do you think that they are also looking at this American pragmatic approach and thinking that this is something that could help them resolve their issues, or is it more of a trying to side with a big American power?
Actually, both, because what we see, whether it's the perception from Central Asia or where I'm located, the South Caucasus, there is a welcome move of an American challenge to areas that were normally and historically Russia's sphere of influence. And in this regard, EU engagement and now American initiatives for Central Asia, the South Caucasus, reflect a welcome opportunity at challenging Russia's position in Eurasia.
One of the things that we've been noticing as well is, as a peace initiative, having this pay-to-play element does sound a little bit counterintuitive. Can you help us unpack some of that? It's like, on the one hand, I do understand Trump's perspective of thinking that they paid for being in the UN and perhaps trying to switch things around, but is it really productive to try to get more members to sign in on peace when it comes with a hefty ticket price?
Well, clearly not. In other words, this profit-driven commercial aspect of international diplomacy is counterproductive. At the same time, it's also rather reflective of President Trump's approach to geopolitics, where everything is transactional, everything has a price. But these are not membership dues we're talking to and talking about. Moreover, what I'm worried about, even beyond the price tag, is how this initiative has deviated from the original. The original emphasis was on the reconstruction of Gaza, and this initiative has transformed into a much more diluted yet globally ambitious effort with really much less of a authentic or realistic approach.
Right. Can we take a look at how what role Central Asia plays in all this with this renewed Washington involvement?
Well, I do think, as this is a welcome development, from a Central Asian perspective, which as a key transit and transport region endowed with energy and natural resources, this is a very interesting development where Central Asia is no longer an arena of competition between Russia and China. This is, following EU engagement, a new American presence. And this is actually offering an opportunity for the Central Asian states to navigate between these much larger regional powers.
How much gravity do you think will that shift towards Central Asia now, with another power being in the play, like you mentioned, divesting from just Russia and China vying for power?
Well, that's a significant question because, as you mentioned, it's the gravity. It's actually the astrophysics of this, where the Central Asian states and those in the South Caucasus are now struggling to counter the gravitational pull from the Russian orbit. Now it's not just a trade-off with Chinese interests, but actually Western engagement. And for Central Asia and the South Caucasus, this is a very new development of these countries to hedge, to play off in terms of geopolitical competition in pursuit of geopolitical cooperation.
Now, one of the countries that have been signing up to this, which raised a little bit of eyebrow, is Belarus. But we've also seen recent engagement between Washington and Belarus with the release of prisoners, the seemingly thawing of relations. Do you think that this is another step towards that normalizing of relationship with the Lukashenko regime?
I do not. And the reason I'm so firm in the answer is human rights democratization is really not the uniform standard of measurement for the U.S. and its foreign policy. And regarding even the invitations, the Georgian government, because of its moves away from Europe, its abandoning of democratization within Georgia, has not earned an invitation, interestingly, whereas Belarus has been invited. This is yet another demonstration not just of double standards, but rather of this real estate deal approach of President Trump.
Right, that is very interesting, taking a look at this organization and a real estate approach to it. But that also says a lot about the person chairing it, being President Donald Trump. Do you think that it will be something sustainable if U.S. or Washington continues to pursue this route, but then we have eventually have to have a different president? And with a different mindset, will this format still work?
I remain skeptical, specifically because looking at the Trump administration, this is probably not the first and not the last time we're going to see such a personal rather than a political move. In other words, this is very much personal rather than a national interest pursued by the U.S. And I do think it follows a more destructive initiative where President Trump only weeks before has withdrawn from over 30 international organizations and agencies. So I do think this is seriously weak in terms of sustainability. And I also think this is the wrong approach to restoring multilateral diplomacy.
So do you think going forward things might normalize back to how we know it, or do you think this is such a turning point that we are seeing America kind of diverging from the traditional way of doing things and starting to relaunch this multilateral world?
Well, honestly, it's too soon to say. And to be quite fair, we do see a welcome de-escalation of the American rhetoric over Greenland, a climb down, if you will. But nevertheless, given the rather unpredictable nature of the Trump administration, only one thing is certain, that it is demonstrated a reckless disregard for international law and international diplomacy. And I really think the burden of responsibility, of proof for this engagement or this organization is questionable.
Right, and it does seem like a stress test for all the nations as well. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. At the World Economic Forum on Thursday, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff said peace talks have narrowed to a single unresolved issue that appears solvable.
Witkoff said he would travel to Moscow and Abu Dhabi for further discussions while pressing Ukraine's negotiating team for months of intensive engagement. Beyond security, he outlined a proposed tariff-free regime for Ukrainian exports to the United States, describing it as potentially transformative for post-war recovery. European leaders reiterated support for Ukraine's eventual European Union membership, though timelines varied. Meanwhile, NATO officials warned that Ukraine still urgently needs military support, and several speakers cautioned that there is little evidence Vladimir Putin is prepared to compromise.
That Jared and I have.
Ukraine's anti-corruption authorities have brought high-profile charges against the former leadership of the country's border service.
On Thursday, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau announced it had charged former State Border Guard Chief Serhiy Dayneko with accepting bribes. Investigators alleged that in 2023, border personnel received at least 204,000 euros to facilitate cigarette smuggling across Ukraine's border with the European Union. According to the Bureau, smugglers exploited fake diplomatic license plates and diplomatic passports held by relatives of Ukrainian diplomats, allowing vehicles to cross without inspection.
As Europe ramps up defense production, some automakers are moving into military manufacturing.
Renault has agreed to cooperate with French defense firm Turgis Gaillard to produce military drones reportedly destined for Ukraine. Details of the agreement have not been disclosed, but the Financial Times reports that the project is part of a broader French government push to link civilian industry with defense production. The initiative, led by France's Defense Ministry, aims to expand drone manufacturing capacity and apply industrial know-how to military needs. Renault brings large-scale production expertise, while Turgis Gaillard contributes defense aviation capabilities, reflecting a wider NATO shift toward drone-centric warfare.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.